This is History 102, Lecture 7, Rise of Totalitarianism. This part specifically, we'll be talking about fascism as a political and economic ideology. The first thing we want to define, before we define fascism and study it, we want to define a word called totalitarianism. What is totalitarianism? Totalitarianism is a form of government that focuses on total, the word total, totalitarianism, on total control of society. Economic, political, religious, cultural, language, laws. So totalitarianism can be military control, it can be civilian control, it can be by one group, a small group of people, or it can be an individual. So totalitarianism is a general term, and then specific policies or economies or ideologies or political parties or whatever could fit under this totalitarian idea. All right. When historians study the history of Europe in the early 20th century, historians note, and even at the time they noted, people noted at the time, but historians note or notice that after World War I, liberal democracy, capitalism were under philosophical attack. When Europeans and even Americans of the era, when they looked at, there's the height of the progressive era in the first couple decades of the 20th century, and then you had the disaster of World War I. World War I really put into a lot of people's minds in Western civilization, Western Europe, and the United States, Canada, Mexico, the Western world, North America, Western Europe, that liberal democracy and capitalism had failed society. They'd lost their moral authority. And so Europeans started to look to other sources of economic power and other political ideologies as a way to recover from First World War I, and then in the 1930s you had a worldwide economic downturn. And so the argument historians make, the predominant view, the majority point of view for historians, is that the destruction from World War I and then the economic downturn of the 1930s, which was a global economic downturn. Because we're American, and we're Americans, so we're American history, we tend to focus on the Great Depression, just being American. It was a worldwide economic downturn in the 1930s. And so the argument for most historians is that the Depression, World War I, had discredited the ideas of liberal democracy and capitalism to the point where people chose totalitarian governments. Okay. And I say chose, but obviously not always chose. Lenin, Stalin came to power in Russia, turned it into the Soviet Union. Mussolini in Italy, National Socialism in Germany. Those are the three biggest examples. But then there's other smaller examples all over Europe. And so that's why we need to study this era in European history, during the 20s and 30s. It seems that liberal democracy and capitalism is discredited on the way out, and people at the time recognize it, like, democracy is dead, kind of a thing. The next item we need to talk about is fascism, the word fascism and what it really means. political scientists argue and don't know ultimately what it means, can't agree on what it means. So regular people like you and I I'm educated too, but I'm not a political scientist, but I'm a historian. But regular people, don't know what it means. The first lesson for you that I would like to get across to you is most of the time when the word fascism or fascist is used, it is used incorrectly, and it's in our day and age it's overused. It's lost, to me, it's lost all meaning. Because today people use the word fascism or fascist just to describe anything they don't like. And so the first thing we're learning here in this class is we're going to learn academically what the ideology actually is. And you'll find that most of the time when it's used, it's not used correctly. Right, so most, and if you're wondering if you use it correctly, just assume you're not. So, anyways, so what is fascism? Right. Fascism is a political ideology that developed in the late 19th century. In 19th century Europe. In late 19th century Europe, you had writers, philosophers, political parties, people into politics, political activists, who were critiquing communism. Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels. Okay. The biggest difference between the development of Marxism or communism, however you want to call it, Marxism, and the development of fascism as political ideologies is Marxism really grew out of the ideas of one or two men, Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels. But like you can point to, like when you study communism, Marxism, you can point to one guy, Karl Marx. There's one guy to blame, Karl Marx. And so studying communism or Marxism, you can narrow in on one guy. With fascism, you don't have that. It's in the late 19th century. If you want to study the origins of fascism, you have to go to the late 19th century and then find different writers that you think fit whatever definition of fascism you're thinking. The main uniting issue of all this, I guess, political scientists call it proto-fascist literature. The main uniting theme is they're critiquing Karl Marx. They're critiquing Marxism is the main kind of uniting theme. Outside of that, then there's all kinds of other, kind of things. So that's the first lesson about fascism you need to know. It's different than the beginnings of communism. Communism, Karl Marx. Fascism, it's various. You have to go to the 19th century. And political scientists do this. They go to the 19th century and try to find writers that they think are fascists, and then they go with that. The development of political fascism is generally credited to Benito Mussolini, who we'll talk about in a minute. Actually in another video, in the next video. So the main attraction of fascism were people who would lose out the most if or when the communists ever took over. If ever there's ever a Marxist or communist or socialist political party that took over, the group of Europeans in European side that would be hurt the most, middle class individuals, tended to be fascist, tended to like this idea. Okay. The second thing you are learning with me today is we're going to get a little more accurate look at what fascism and communism are. In general, how you are taught, and I was taught the same thing. It's just I was able to overcome the, propagandists. I was able to figure it out. But the number one lesson you need to get, the next idea you need to get in your head is that what you're usually shown in class, in high school, and we all had it in government class, high school, and even when you go to college, is you get shown this spectrum. Fascism is at one end, the right. Communism is the other end, the left. And you're taught fascism and communism in a way that you are led to believe that they're opposite ideologies, Mr. Nils. So you think they're opposite ideologies. Okay. That is I am arguing to you as a historian that is not correct. That is not the correct way to look at it. It is they're not on a spectrum where they're the exact opposite. Okay. Sometimes I tell students, sometimes they say they're both so extreme they actually come around and meet in the middle. Another way to look at it, a more accurate analogy for fascism and communism would be they're different sides of the same coin. There are a lot of similarities between fascism and communism as political ideologies. And so I would argue that a more accurate description would be they're two sides of the same coin. They're not exact opposite. Your Marxist instructors want you to think that. They're two sides of the same coin. Okay. How are they two sides of the same coin? Both fascism and communism are totalitarian. They believe in government control, complete government control of the economy and society. They're both totalitarian. Both fascist and communist ideology critique capitalism and liberal democracy. Both fascist writers and communist writers critique capitalism and liberal democracy as failures, weak, and it fails human society. They both reject liberal democracy. They both reject classical liberalism. They both argue that ideas such as individual rights and liberties are greedy and immoral. They believe collective rights are more important. Both fascism and communism, they are both progressive ideologies. They both seek to evolve or progress society to a utopian state. Now, the ultimate utopian state might be different in some ways, but it's still a utopian state. What's interesting is another interesting similarity that not a lot of people think about. Generally, you're told, well, communism is a classless society, and well, fascism is too. Fascism seeks to get rid of all the classes too, and have a united nation. Where all the classes work together. Okay, and so they both, in a way, they both argue for a classless society, where class doesn't matter. And so fascism and communism have a lot of similarities. There are differences, and this chart, the chart I have up for you, kind of goes over those differences. Okay. So they have a ton of similarities, very, very similar, both progressive. They both want to create a utopian society. They're both authoritarian. They're both totalitarian. They both critique capitalism and liberal democracy. They want to strip people of the individual rights. It's like they're both. So, there are some differences, and we go over this. So what organizes a society? A communist government or a communist economy. In a communist society, the society is organized around class conflict. That the working class, or the proletariat as Marx says, where the working class seeks to take over, and you have what Marx called the dictatorship of the proletariat. Interesting. So, where the working class, and so class conflict is a major part of communist ideology. In a fascist society or fascist philosophical society, the state is organized around nationalism, not class conflict. When you study those 19th century writers, proto-fascists, I guess you could say, is what political science would call them. They, one of the critiques of Marx was that communism or Marxism divides people up. It gets them to hate each other based on class. In a fascist political philosophy or ideology, everyone works together for the betterment of the state or the nation. And so everyone works together as part of that nation. Right. So in a communist society, nationalism is bad, religion's bad, war's bad in a way, although, political violence is okay. Capitalism is bad. So in a communist society with Marxist philosophy, things like nationalism, religion, war among the proletariat is bad because they are tools to oppress or silence the proletariat. In other words, our factory workers are upset. How can we get them happy so we can keep them working for us? Well, we'll focus on patriotism, nationalism. Religion's bad because the argument is religion keeps people from thinking about their oppression now. And so kind of all that stuff. And so you can see the differences between fascism and communism there. In a fascist society, nationalism is the organizing principle, so nationalism is not bad. What's bad is class conflict, right? You get it? For a fascist society, you should not be dividing up your people between rich, middle, and poor. You're all that nation. You should all be working together. In a communist society, you want the proletariat hating everyone else so they can take over. In a fascist society, religion is okay as long as it serves the interest of the state. Religion can be used to further the nationalism. Fascism critiques capitalism just as much as communism does. Right? They're both command economies. That's another similarity. Where they're different is, in a fascist society, private property is okay. You can be wealthy in a fascist society, just as long as you serve the interests of the state. So the state is still the ultimate arbiter. The state is still the ultimate arbiter of what happens. In a communist society, theoretically, the state owns everything. So theoretically, you're not supposed to have rich people. Newsflash: there were rich people in the Soviet Union. So it's not the ideal always, right? So you can kind of read through that. So you see the similarities. There are some differences, but the big lesson I need you to get is there's quite a bit of similarities that you're not told about. Okay, and that's this slide. I've already told you. So my argument to you as a historian is it's less a spectrum where they're the opposite ideologies. They're the same. They're different sides of the same coin. They're different sides of the same totalitarian coin. They may take different routes, but they get to the same destination. So they're not opposite. They both have the same goals, the same destination. They may take different paths to get there, but ultimately it's a totalitarian destination. So you can kind of see how they're similar and different. And so that's going to end this this video.